Om Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantar Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantir Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapa Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shanti Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shanti Shantireva Shanti Shantirme Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
Good morning. We'll sing in the garden on page 11.
Om Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Mahedhi Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Te namam pahi nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Our topic today is creative imagination. While speaking about the human personality, we often say in discussions in Vedanta circles that the human personality can be seen as primarily threefold. There is the external, there is the body, which we all see and which is visible to all. There is the mind, and beyond that is the spirit. We know that the body has physical strength and power, and a lot of the work that we do throughout the day requires physical actions, physical movements and activities. But invisibly, beyond the body is the mind. And the mind is even more powerful than the body. The power that the mind has, expressed primarily through thinking, is probably the most underrated power in the world. We speak about nuclear power and all those powers, but the mind is much more powerful than all of that. The problem is this, that our physical activities are visible mostly, unless you consciously try to hide them. It's open. What you do, people around you can see what you do. But what you think, only you know. Only we know what's going on in our heads. No one else knows. And so thoughts are private. Actions are mostly public. And people often judge us not so much by what we think, because no one knows what we are thinking. They judge us by what we do. And since we are very aware and we value what people think of us, we take great care about our actions, especially when they are in public. Not so much about our thoughts, because we know that no one knows what's going on in my head. And that's a problem, because it's what we think and how we think that shapes our personality. It's what we think and how we think that determines our identity. And so we need to give greater attention. The body is not to be neglected, sure, but we need to give greater attention to the mind. And especially spiritual seekers need to do that. Our personalities, as I said, are shaped by the mind, and the mind is shaped by thinking. Swami Vivekananda once said, "Imagination is the door to inspiration and the basis of all thought. All prophets, poets, and discoverers have had great imaginative power." And all of us have the power of imagination. It's there. The mind being the hub and source of all activity, we need to pay special attention to the power of imagination that we have. Because unless and until we harness the power of thinking, the power of imagination that we have, we are no different from animals. So if the power of thinking within our minds is not utilized well or is ignored, we don't deserve to be called human beings. Oftentimes human beings like to distinguish ourselves from animals. Somehow we feel that we are more evolved. We don't know whether animals might agree with us, but at least we like to see that we are more evolved. And the one way of affirming that we are more evolved is because we think we can think, we can think, and animals. Now, whether animals can think or not, only they know. But at least we like to somehow think that we are somehow better, more civilized, more evolved. Now, imagination is itself of two kinds. I like to distinguish them by saying one is imagining the imaginary, and second is imagining the real. Now, imagining the imaginary is a perfectly useless activity. And most of the imagination that we have is just imagining the imaginary. What if? All of the things that we think about, what if? Well, what if may have no factual basis in reality. I mean, if you're thinking about some past event, what if I had done something differently? Well, you can keep on, but it doesn't really serve much useful purpose. Or what if the next 4 years, for instance, what will happen to the country? If you think, again, that's imagination. It might help us somehow to kind of prepare for it, but yet it's not particularly useful. And for a spiritual seeker, a lot of the thinking that we do is pretty not only useless but also destructive. In social circles, when we move, when we pass judgments on other people or places or things that we see, how much of the judgments, how much of the judgment that we pass is based on actual information? A lot of it is just based on guesswork. Again, we know, just looking at our own selves, we know that only we know ourselves better than anyone else does, because a lot of ourselves is private, is inside. People see only the external. And just as other people's judgment of us can go wrong because they are only seeing a part of me, the part that is visible, my judgment about other people can also go wrong because I don't have the full data with me. I'm just seeing what's external. So we have to be careful about judging things outside of ourselves, at least recognizing that we are working with incomplete data. So that's one kind of thinking, the kind of thinking that is not guided, not controlled, not restrained. And that pretty much falls into the category of imagining the imaginary, not very useful in spiritual life. But there is a second kind of imagination, that is imagining the real. Now, in spiritual life, of course, God, for instance, plays a major role, a significant presence in the life of a spiritual seeker is God, even though some may not even use the word God. The Buddhists, for instance, may not theologically use the term God. Or even when we use the term God, we may have a different mental picture before our mind. Nevertheless, that's the term that is used. Now, unless and until one has had a direct experience of God, all that we can say is, well, I believe in God. We are trying to imagine as best we can about what and how our spiritual ideal is. If we believe in God, who or what or where God is, that's still imagination. But here, in the case of God, for spiritual seekers, it's not imagining the imaginary, because the spiritual seeker believes there is God. I may not have seen him, I may not have experienced him or her, but I know God exists. And until I'm able to experience God directly, all that I can do is imagine. But imagining here is not imaginary. Imagining here is real. Swami Vivekananda says, imagination properly employed is our greatest friend. It goes beyond reason and is the only light that takes us everywhere. So, imagination is a very, very powerful faculty we have. If it is used well, it can help accelerate our progress in spiritual life considerably. This is what Vivekananda says again. Try to keep up the imagination in yoga, being careful to keep it pure and holy. We all have our peculiarities in the way of imaginative power. Follow the way most natural to you, it'll be the easiest. Which is why in Vedanta there is no one standard universal method of meditation or prayer. Because as Swami Vivekananda said, we all have our own special way of imagining. Minds are different, and the symbols we employ, the way we like to think of things will be different. And we therefore need to use the way that comes most effortlessly to us, most natural to us. But as Swamiji points out, we have to keep it pure and holy. By pure is meant, what would a pure imagination mean? That if I'm trying to imagine something, I should not contaminate it with all distracted thoughts and images, or thoughts and images which are incompatible with the object that I'm trying to imagine. So it must be integrated, it must be focused, and it must be something that will take me closer to the real rather than away from the real. So how would imagining the real be in the life of most spiritual seekers? So let's take a few examples. Oftentimes, whatever our practice of meditation may be, we are often advised by our teachers that meditate on God within you, usually within the heart. Now, when we try to meditate, and we have discussed this oftentimes before, what does it mean to imagine God to be real? Again, you're visualizing. If we truly believe God dwells in the heart, and we close our eyes, we try to withdraw our mind from all external sensations, then ideally, when I've withdrawn my mind from the world, I should be seeing God. That's as simple as that. But what most of us see is that we try to shut our eyes, try to sit in a quiet spot, and then, we usually see darkness in the beginning. And what do you do when you're just facing darkness? And then a least bit of sound somewhere, you just get distracted. Oh, someone has entered the room. Someone is this. So all these kind of thoughts. So the mind, how do you shut the mind? How do you make the mind go only in one direction? The song that we sang at the beginning today about in the garden, think about it this way. It is a very constructive imagination. You can think about, for instance, in the myth of the Garden of Eden. Think of Adam and Eve before they disobeyed God, before they ate from the tree that they were forbidden to eat from. Well, this was probably their experience. God did walk with them, talk with them. It was very real. The presence of God in their lives, walking in the garden along with them, was very real. And then, of course, as we see, then there's something happens. That they began to think, if you like, they began to imagine, what would happen if I ate the fruit of this tree? Why should I not eat it? What's wrong with it? Why am I being told? So once this destructive thinking occurred, then they lost that contact. And now today, the rest of us, what do we do? It's possible for us then it can be helpful for a spiritual seeker to say, well, I am in the Garden of Eden before the fruit was eaten, and I am walking with the Lord, and I'm able to hear the Lord, and the Lord speaks with me. Now, this might seem to be imagination, but those who have tried to imagine it this way, this becomes a reality. In fact, this becomes a reality of a higher dimension than the reality we are experiencing now. And so all of our spiritual practices must become real, even though they may begin with imagination. And so coming back to the meditation, so when we are asked to meditate on your Ishta, on your chosen deity in your heart, we are imagining it. Well, if you're seeing your Ishta in your heart, no need of imagination. But if you close your eyes and you don't see, then you are imagining. Now, you are not imagining your Ishta in your heart who is not there. You are imagining an Ishta in your heart who is already there. It's almost like, think about it this way. Um, you are driving early in the morning and there is a very thick fog. Your GPS shows you that the road is straight. You're not really seeing it further off. Maybe it's safer to drive slowly, but you're not really seeing it. You kind of have to imagine that the road is straight, or if it turns, so you have help of your GPS, but you are still imagining it because you're not actually seeing it. And so long as your imagination is of the real, that the road is turning and you are imagining it's turning, although you might take the help, you are on the safe side. But if you're just blindfolded and you're just imagining it, then you don't know where your car will take you. And so therefore, in meditation, when we are imagining, if you like, the presence of God, we are imagining the presence of God who is already there. So that's imagining the real. When we read spiritual texts, for instance, those of us who read a life of Ramakrishna or read the Gospel of Ramakrishna, his book of conversations, many of devotees have made it their practice to read at least a page or two from that book daily. Now, it's possible to read these books. For instance, let me take a specific example. When you read the Gospel of Ramakrishna, one way of reading it is, well, here is this book, and it has some great ideas. This is helpful. I find it, it calms down my mind. It gives me some practical tips about how to live, and I read it. That's one way. A second way of reading that would be, well, this is what Ramakrishna spoke to those people more than 100 years ago. That's another way of looking at it. A third way would be actually inserting oneself into the story. Some of you may have seen or heard about this. I noticed it first, and it's present in other places as well. A few years ago, when I was visiting Italy, and I was seeing some of the churches there, the very old churches, there were all these big paintings which were commissioned by some wealthy person of that period. Great paintings on the walls inside the churches, and it was a guided tour, and the guide was, and without the guide telling us, I would never have known this. So there were incidents from the life of Jesus. Now, what the painter did, was probably asked to do, was the person who had paid for that painting was there in that group. So for instance, there is this Jesus and there is a group of people around Jesus. And so the one who has paid for that painting was put in that crowd. And then the guide points out, well, that's really the gentleman who paid for it. And it's a great idea. And what it means is that you are putting yourself into the story. You are not an observer imagining what happened then, but that you become a part of the story. So when we read the Gospel of Ramakrishna, for instance, one way would be that we, for instance, we see in the book M, who recorded those conversations, oftentimes in the beginning, usually in a para or two, will say, this is this date, and Ramakrishna is sitting on his bed, and there are these bunch of people in the room, and sometimes he'll mention a few names of the people, Narendra, Rakhal, and all those are sitting. And if you have a constructive imagination, and as you're trying to visualize the scene, and it becomes a little bit easier if you have actually been to that room or seen a photograph of that room, well, put yourself there. Along with Narendra, Rakhal, and others, just read your name there and say, well, I'm sitting there too. So then whatever Ramakrishna says, he's not merely saying it to those people 100 years ago, he's saying it to you because now you are being addressed directly. And then it becomes very real. The moment we don't, when we stand outside the picture, it's a very detached observation. When you put yourself into the picture, it becomes very personal and it becomes more powerful. So that's another way of reading some of these old texts. There is this incident, I mentioned this on earlier occasions as well, that comes in the Ramayana. Very briefly, after Rama destroys that demon Ravana, and he is about to return back to Ayodhya, the kingdom. And then in Tulsidasa's version of the Ramayana, he describes the scene, and he says that a lot of people had gathered into the open ground knowing that Rama was returning by that celestial aircraft called Pushpak. Pushpak, that was the name of that. And so as soon as Rama's flight lands there, before Rama's landing in Ayodhya, hundreds and thousands of people who had gathered there, what was going on in their heads? What were the kind of things they were imagining? And then Tulsidas says his mother, Kausalya, she imagined, oh, I'm sure, as soon as Rama comes, the first person he will meet will be me. After all, I am his mother. And then his other Sumitra and Kaikeyi, the stepmothers, they felt, oh, Rama is going to definitely come to me. And then every person, every citizen of Ayodhya who had gathered there, everyone felt, Rama loves me so much. He is going to come and meet me. And then the poet describes, as soon as Rama lands, such was this divine power, if you like, that he managed to meet all of them personally. And the poet says that later on, if you were to interview the people there, every one of them would say, he came and met me first. Before me seeing anyone, he just came to me. And they will all be true. So there's imagination is a very, very powerful thing. When harnessed well, used constructively, it can accelerate our spiritual progress considerably. Oftentimes, one of the difficulties that many of us have, especially when we begin the meditation practice, is about the posture. And especially if we are trying to sit cross-legged, and if we have not had, when we are not accustomed to sitting that way for a long time. And many have feel that after a while, after a few minutes, you kind of become, legs become restless, or the feet become numb. So that's the kind of everyone, most people experience those kind of things. So what do? Would imagination help us deal with the posture issues, how to sit during meditation? Patanjali, in his Yoga Sutras, he defines the posture with, this is the aphorism, it says, Sthira Sukham Asanam. There are two essential characteristics necessary for a good meditation posture. Sthiram, it must be stable, and Sukham, it must be comfortable. So we have to find a posture that is both stable and comfortable. So don't sit at the edge of your bed, because if you fall asleep, you might topple. So find a place where you can be stable. So one way of employing imagination there would be, for instance, we are often told that keep your back straight. So when you sit and when you try to breathe mindfully a little bit in the beginning, one way of imagining would be that you see your back, your spinal column, as the trunk of a tree. You really need good imagination for this. Trunk of a tree. And as you breathe in, be conscious whether your back is straight. And then when you breathe out, you just relax. All the joints in your shoulder, the muscles on your face, just relax. And as you relax, the base of your spine, think about it, as I said, that's the trunk of the back is the trunk of a tree. And from the base of your spine, it's the deep roots. It's going down deep underground. You know that if a tree has deep roots in it, then if there is a storm or this wind, such trees won't topple because the roots go very deep. So if you can visualize your back as a tree, and when you are breathing, just try to imagine mentally that its roots have gone very deep, or try to think of a mountain which is so stable, which is strong. It's amazing how helpful this kind of imagination be to really stabilize your meditation posture. It's also helpful to think of the reason sometimes the feet get numb if you're sitting cross-legged is because the weight of the body is not getting evenly distributed. And it's probably not meant to get evenly distributed, because the amount of weight your base of the spine that can hold, the feet are pretty delicate compared to that. So I sometimes think about it this way. We know when you fly, when the plane is about to land, the wheels which are at the back, there are several wheels, and they carry the major load of the plane. And the one wheel in front is pretty fragile, really. So when the plane lands, it first lands on those back wheels, and then it kind of gradually tips. So the front wheel in a plane, now I'm not an expert in this is just a layperson's view. The front wheel is there just to kind of hold it together, but the major weight of the whole aircraft is being held by the wheels at the back. So it's helpful to imagine that usually when we are sitting cross-legged, the body is making contact with the ground or with your meditation cushion in three places. Is your back, the base of your spine, and then usually your ankles or feet. So look upon the front 2 points as the front wheels of an aircraft. They're not meant to carry your weight. If too much of weight falls on the front portion, it's then the feet will get numb. So the major weight is held by the back, and the front are there just to hold your balance. Again, the more creative you can be in your imagination, you will find. In the beginning, it might seem like too much of work, too much of imagination, but if you can do it well, it's amazing. It's very surprising how effective it is. And then you find a posture that's truly stable and truly comfortable. Again, if you have to, as many of us have to, after a while, it's still, everyone, the mileage will vary from person to person, but after some time, you might need to adjust your posture a little bit, adjust the position of your feet a little bit, the legs. I guess probably, I don't remember, a few months ago, when I was driving, my car, I took a rather sharp turn, and the front wheel of my car hit the curb and I had a flat tire, and I had to call the AAA. They were great. They just came and changed the tire, changed the wheel. And what was interesting was this, and of course, I'm not telling you anything new. All of us have had this experience. But the thought that came to my mind was this. So even as he raised the portion of the car with the wheel which had to be changed, the other wheels were they were on the ground. The three wheels were firmly planted, and then he lifted this up, and then quickly, it was done in 5 or 6 minutes. It was a very quick work. as I looked at that, the thought came to my mind. So when you are changing your position in the time of meditation, it's a little bit like changing the wheel on your car. So whichever portion of the body is, or the ankle, your right ankle or left ankle kind of needs a little adjustment, make sure that the rest of the body is still stable, like the other wheels of the car. Lift it a little bit, readjust yourself, find another comfortable posture and sit. So again, everyone, this is not some kind of a magic formula or anything, but I'm just suggesting these things to show that if we use some imaginations like this to make our posture stable, some of the difficulties most of us experience can be overcome. And if you allow your mind to think, you will be able to come up with more innovative, more creative ways of how to do this. Yet another thing that we, as Vedanta students, are encouraged to do is to see the presence of God in everyone and in everything. In fact, the short meditation that we do before every satsang and this thing, well, that is imagination in some ways. Of course, when I say, as you breathe in, visualize your body and mind are being filled with love, strength, compassion. When you breathe out, release all the stress, anxiety. Now, well, you're not really seeing your stress and anxiety going out, so it's imagination. But, and this is very important, if you do it, if you are able to imagine this with total faith and total sincerity, the effect it has is very real. So it's not the effect it has is not imaginary. And so we know that this works. And so that's what I mean by a useful, constructive imagination. So when we are asked to feel the presence of God everywhere, what are the kind of things we can do? What kind of imaginations we can employ? One way is, as again, something that I have mentioned before, when you're driving and when we drive, and we come at a red light. Most of us, especially if you are in a hurry, people get irritated. It's like, oh, I'm going to be delayed, and you kind of jump the red light. Some of us who are very adventurous might want to do that. But how would imagination help us deal with red lights? One Buddhist teacher said, every time your car stops at the red light, think about the red light as the eye of the Buddha. The Buddha is looking at you. Well, that's great. When we are asked to remember God as often as we can, if I can mentally associate the red light with the eye of a Buddha, or a worshipper of the Devi, of the goddess, can think of the bindi, the red light of the bindi on Mother Durga or Holy Mother. So there are ways of associating these everyday experiences we have somehow with our spiritual ideal. You're sitting in the morning, or just taking a walk, and sometimes not when the sun is very harsh and this thing, but sometimes in the mornings or late evenings, you take a walk and you have sunlight falling on you, or you're sitting near your window, and you can feel the kind of a gentle warmth of the sun on your hand. Again, if you have good imagination, one might say, wow, I can feel this is what Holy Mother is patting me on my hand or on my back. Again, I'm just kind of giving you a few ideas. So, and then in summer especially, you're dealing with sunshine all the time. So if I can associate sunshine with something that connects with my spiritual ideal, I will be able to remember God as often as possible. There is we speak about the macrocosm and microcosm often. That's the term Swami Vivekananda used in his book on Jnana Yoga. And one thing that often comes in these discussions is that what is true of the microcosm is also true of the macrocosm. And we find this analogy used often, even in some of the scientists who they say that even when you look at the structure of an atom, there is the nucleus and there are the protons and the electrons going around the nucleus. In some ways, that's a prototype of the galaxies. You have the star and the planets going around. So again, it might seem very crude, but oftentimes what's present at this kind of a microcosmic levels, we can see its counterparts at the cosmic level as well. So just as we have, every one of us has this little body, if we take the entire universe as a whole, then it's possible to look upon the whole universe, the entire material universe, as the body of God. And that's what is called in Sanskrit, called Virat. God as the cosmic person. And some of the nature mystics who have actually felt the living presence of the transcendent being, the transcendent reality, by just looking at, for instance, you go to it's very difficult to find it in Boston area, but if you kind of go in the Midwest and you see these huge farmlands, and then you see these crops and trees growing, and then there's a breeze, and they kind of just move. Again, with good imagination, you can almost see it's the body of this cosmic being. And imagine the living, breathing universe, so to speak. And this is important. The Vedic sages, the sages of the Vedas, when they looked at the world, they saw it as a living presence of the being. Sometimes when too much of philosophy sometimes can take away all the poetry out of life. That's we have to be careful. Being philosopher doesn't mean that you become insensitive to some of these just the poetry of life in some way. Because sometimes when we speak about Brahman alone being real, this is really not really real, this is all just dream. The idea is not to downgrade or saying to ignore the world. And I think sometimes it can happen that way. We might be so absorbed into the transcendent that we may lose the power of the world in which we live. Again, if we can use that imagination creatively, even in the material universe, it's possible for us to feel the living presence of God. It's possible for us to feel the entire world as a breathing, real entity. It's a little bit of the inner refinement is necessary. Every one of us is potentially a mystic. So don't think that mystics are some special beings who kind of drop down from heavens and the rest of us can do is just kind of say, wow, they're great people. No, it's every one of us, there is a potential mystic in all of us. The more we are able to refine this power of imagination, and in order for us to do that, we need sufficient control over the mind. Because it's like this, any instrument that we use, if we can wield that instrument well, if we have control over that instrument, it can do wonders for us. Sometimes, usually all of these companies, when they bring out new gadgets, and in their promotional advertisements or videos, they want to show what these gadgets can do. For instance, now whenever these iPhone promos, they want to say, these are the kind of photos you can take, such great is the camera these can do, or the Apple Pencil. These are the kind of great drawings you can do with that pencil on your iPad or any kind of a tablet. And it's so persuasive that people think all that they need to do is just go and get the pencil and they'll be artists right away. No, so it's not just in the gadget, but this is important.
the potentiality is there. So you might have the right instrument. If you know how to use it, if you use it well, you will be able to do the great drawings and sketches that we are told it's possible to do with it. Now that instrument, the mind, is already with us. We don't even need to go and buy it. It's already with us. All that we need to do is to refine it. And this instrument that is with us has been with us for a long time. The body has been with us only since the time we were born. So body is a very recent companion. But the mind that we have has been with us life after life after life. Just as anything that has been used for a long time might show signs of age. But it needs fixing. Things need fixing. So all that we need to do is to look at our minds. One good news about this is that the power of the mind is never destroyed totally. It's always there. It may have gotten covered because of lack of use or misuse or abuse. But if we take special care, and all initial spiritual practices are essentially to make our mind our friend. In fact, in the beginning of prayer, meditation, no matter what, you can call it your spiritual practices. In the beginning, these practices have very little to do with God directly. We are dealing with the mind. Only when we have done some work with our own mind, a little bit of clarity, a little bit of refinement of the mind, then alone these practices then help us start dealing with the spiritual reality itself. So our first struggle, for many of us, the first struggle is with the body, kind of the regularity, the posture. Then the struggle is with the mind. And the more we are able to deal effectively with these two, it's then that we then are able to deal with the spiritual ideal. Creation is a journey of the one to the many. Well, God alone existed, and this whole creation came about, and this many came. Now, the many is what really produces all entanglements. All the issues, problems, stress, anxiety, worry, and what have you, everything that we have is because of the entanglements created by just the presence of the many. And therefore, the goal is to go back to one. If we have been thrown out of the Garden of Eden, the goal is to go back to the Garden of Eden when we walked with God and talked with God and God spoke with us. So in that sense, creation is a problem, and we need to reverse the process. Now, reversing the process cannot be done right away when the creative force is very strong. And the creative force, as I said, imagination is a very creative act. The mind imagining a lot of things. We are creating. At the physical level, we create through procreation. Through new generations coming, that's an act of creation at the individual level. But at the level of the mind, there is creation also. A painter creates works of art. A writer creates. So whether the product is a painting or a sculpture or original writing, these are all products of creation. Now, those are ways by which we can allow this force of creativity to kind of run its course for a while. Only when it runs its course for a while does it become easier to then reverse the process. But as we know, when you kind of go to a source of a river, usually the current is very strong. Those of you who have in the Himalayas, for instance, if you go to closer to the source of the Ganges or the Yamuna, amazing speed. It's like it can cut through rocks. That's the speed. And no one even dared to go and stand in the river there. You will be just crushed. But then later on, when the river comes down to the plains, it's kind of more gentle, it's become broader and gentle. So in the creative force is very strong. We need to find good ways to allow it to run its course for a while through different ways of creativity, the talents and the knowledge and the capacity that we may have. Swami Vivekananda said, "Some imaginations help to break the bondage of the rest. The whole universe is imagination, but one set of imaginations will cure another set. Those that tell us that there is sin and sorrow and death in the world are terrible, but the other set, thou art holy, there is God, there is no pain, these are good and help to break the bondage of the others. The highest imagination that can break all the links of the chain is that of personal God." So we need to harness the capacity to imagine that we have. To the extent we succeed in doing it in a constructive way, doing it in a way that is useful, helpful in our spiritual life, we will see that that imagination will take us to the real. In the beginning, we will be imagining the real, but if we continue on the path as taught to us by our elders, by our teachers, we continue, then that which was only an imagination will become a reality. But that's something that we all can pay attention to. So these are some of the thoughts that come to my mind when we think about the power of imagination. And as sincere spiritual seekers, we need to pay a very careful attention to how the mind functions, what kind of tricks the mind can play on us, or what can wonders our mind can do for us. That's why the Gita says, the Gita says, the mind can be our friend, the mind can be our enemy. And so when our mind becomes our enemy, then life becomes truly a hell. We don't have to die in order to experience hell. We can experience hell right now if our own mind does not become our friend. But it's possible to make our mind our friend by using that power of the mind, the power of imagination, in a constructive and useful way. And when the mind becomes the friend, then our spiritual progress becomes smooth, easy, and effortless. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. Next Sunday, we have a guest speaker. Our Swamiji from Singapore is visiting, and he will speak with us on Vedanta in Southeast Asia. This will be a good opportunity for us to know how Vedanta students in other parts of the world, especially in Southeast Asia, where many of us have not had a chance to know how the Vedanta movement is functioning there, and how, well, I have no idea what the Swamiji is going to say, but we will have an opportunity to know about Vedanta in that part of the world. So that's next Sunday. Name is Swami Vimokshananda. This Wednesday we will not have the Upanishad class, so the Vedanta study group will meet next week on Wednesday. But the Arati and meditation on Tuesday and Saturday will go on as usual. You're all welcome for all of these programs. Let's conclude with a prayer now. Om.
May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.